general and administrative expense. It was much higher in 2020. Why? The revenues were much lower. Typically, general and administrative expenses, you can think of it as overhead. Whether or not you have a lot of passengers, that overhead doesn't change that much. So if your revenue is lower, that ratio is going to go up. Okay, so research and development. Technically speaking, some of that is actually has nothing to do with research and development. A lot of stock-based compensation, especially when it comes to stock options of the executives, are classified under research and development. And other stuff. Now let's talk about short-term solvency ratios. The idea is to measure, and I'm going to put measure in scare quotes, ability of the firm to meet its short-term obligations using liquid assets. And I'm also putting liquid in scare quotes. It kind of depends on your perception of what's liquid. And not everything is as liquid across firms. Obviously, cash is cash. It's the same liquidity everywhere. But receivables, the degree to which they can be converted to cash quickly depends on the firm. You know, if you're Boeing, your receivables are from airlines and stuff. If airlines are doing well, those receivables are really collectible easily. If they're not doing well, who knows? But if you're Walmart, most of your receivables are basically from credit card operation companies. Customer comes, swipes the card, the actual cash goes into Walmart's account anywhere from 3 to 7 days. That would be receivable for Walmart, but that's a very liquid, it's almost cash-like receivable. Similarly with inventory of Walmart is liquid. What do you think inventory of Boeing consists of? Primarily either finished planes that were not sold yet, or parts of the planes that are not completed yet. Do you really think that those are liquid, even though technically speaking they're parts of current asset? So that's why I put those in scare quotes. Depending upon the firm, we may vary what we consider liquid. And that also kind of plays a role in using different measures. We're going to start with the mother of all solvency ratios. It's called the current ratio. It's basically current assets divided by current liabilities. And purpose is simple. The degree to which a firm could meet its obligations that are due in a year using its current assets. Presuming that all current assets are technically easily convertible to cash without losing much in value. Presumably, you want this number greater than 1. And in the old days, current ratio less than 1 was considered a sign of short-term financial stress. It simply means these guys had to come up with money from somewhere to meet their short-term obligations. Whether or not you can come up with that money, well, that is not always a given. Usually when you're short, you go to bank or you go to loan markets and you borrow money, right? Not all firms can do that. These days, especially if you're not a small business, if you're a small business, this ratio is still very important. Because it's not that easy for a small business to borrow for day-to-day operations. It's not that easy to borrow for investment to begin with, and nobody's going to lend you to meet your current account needs, current asset needs. But for larger firms, especially if you're looking at listed firms these days, it's not how much assets you have, how much current assets you have that's important. It's how much access to cash you have. I'm a firm that has, let's say, $1 billion in sales. And typically, you probably should have at least $50 million in liquid assets to support sales like that. And I go to a bank and say, how about you give me $50 million line of credit? That doesn't mean you borrow $50 million. That means if you choose to do so, you can borrow up to $50 million. But since that's a line of credit, that is an off-the-books item. It's not going to be in the balance sheet. So you'll never see that. But if you look at the footnotes of the firm's financial statements, you will see it, but the standard balance sheet is not going to show that. Lines of credit are important. And firms also push many items such as receivables out of balance sheet by securitizing those assets. So I got a lot of customers that owe me $100 million, and they promise to pay me within 30 to 90 days. I can keep them in my books, but I need to finance them. I can borrow money to finance them. Or I can go ahead and issue a commercial paper that's backed by those receivables. That means whatever that comes from those receivables is going to go to the share holders of that commercial paper. If my customers are not able to pay, well, that's the problem of, depending upon the structure, problem of the bondholders or commercial paper holders. Sometimes you tell them, okay, you get the cash, but if it's short, I'm going to pay you, which would be a contingent liability that's not in the books either. Now, not all current assets are equally liquid. Obviously, cash is cash. If you think about the current assets as large groups, cash and cash-like, and I typically incorporate short-term investments in that. Those are the most liquid. Then you got accounts receivable. Then you have inventory. So inventory is typically least liquid of current assets. So what if I calculated a ratio that does not include inventory? And that's called quick ratio, aka asset test. That's simply current assets minus inventory divided by current liabilities. Or that's equal to current ratio minus inventory over current liabilities. This basically says I'm, let's say, a supplier of this firm, and I'm concerned whether or not they could pay me within 30 days. If this is a firm where inventory turnover is a lot longer than 30 days, I'm not going to consider that as a source of liquidity. So I'm going to look at the quick ratio. Again, same idea. Traditionally, you want this to be greater than 1. And for small businesses, 1.5 and 2 is probably a lot more comforting for short-term shareholders, short-term creditors. And you don't want it to be less than 1 unless they have access to lines of credit. If you're concerned that even the accounts receivable may be doubtful, you just look at the cash ratio, which is cash and cash-like. Such as short-term investments divided by current liabilities. So if you know that this firm takes a while to collect their debt, and we're going to calculate that number as well. How long does it take on average for the firm to collect their debt? Then I'm not interested in a short-term solvency measure that actually does include accounts receivable. So let's get another financial statement, because I want to be able to make comparisons across firms. So I'm going to download financial statements of 2 related firms. Okay, somebody tell me, which one do you want?